So we're going into week 4, and this week I wanted to look at the appearance attributes of paths. So we've been using our shape tools and using our pen tool to create paths, and we know that those paths have certain attributes. By attributes, I mean they might have a fill color or a stroke color. If you notice up here, there's a stroke palette here, so the stroke could be very large or it could be very small depending on what point size you make it. But you can also add attributes in addition to the basics that we find with the fill and the stroke. So let's look at our appearance palette. So the appearance palette, like all other palettes, is in the window menu. You just kind of scroll down, and if you click on appearance, it'll pop up on your desktop. It's also sometimes docked on the side over here. And notice that I have this path selected that I just drew, and I have a fill of white and a stroke of black. The appearance attributes palette will tell me exactly what attributes the path I have selected has. So when I look in this palette, I see that I have a stroke. Notice that it says 3 points, and notice up here my stroke weight is 3 points for this particular path. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. I'll go to 1 point here, and notice it changed in the appearance attributes palette. Now it's 1 point, a stroke of black. My fill is white, so if I want to change my fill color, I can click here and find a color, or go to my color palette or my swatches palette. So I'll fill this path with blue, or kind of a purple blue, and notice here's my fill here. So I have a fill of blue. Opacity, now I haven't showed you the transparency palette. We do have a palette in Illustrator that lets us affect our opacity, and if you want to find that in window, you can go up here and go down to transparency, and a palette will pop up, and this will let you kind of change the opacity of a fill or a stroke. So notice it's getting lighter, so that if there was something underneath this path right here, it would now show up because the opacity is 40, well, now it's 46%. Okay, I'll go ahead and make this 100%, and we can look at this palette a little bit later in the class when we start working with blending modes. I'll close the palette. Okay, so let's say I wanted to have 2 strokes on this path. I want a large stroke of black, that's maybe 30 or 40 points, and a very small stroke of yellow on top. So first I'll do the black stroke. I'll go up here and I'll go to my stroke palette here, and I'll choose black, and then I'll go to my stroke points here, and I'll go down, and I said between 20 and 30, I'll just select 40, so it's nice and thick here. So I have a thick stroke of 40 points, a fill of kind of a purple blue, and now I want to add a stroke. So how do you do that on your appearance attribute? Notice you have these little tabs down here. I can click add new stroke or add new fill. So I'm going to go ahead and click add new stroke, and a new stroke pops up. It kind of defaults to what I last created. So notice I have a black stroke of 40 points on top of my old stroke, which is a black stroke of 40 points. So I'm going to change this stroke, so let's make it 10 points so we can see it pretty clearly. And then I'll change the color here. I'll click a yellow, and you can click just directly on the tab if you want a little color picker to pop up. So now I have 2 strokes on this path, a small stroke that's 10 points, a large stroke that's 40 points, and a fill that is purple. My opacity is 100% because I didn't change that. And so I could keep going. I could add another fill, I could add another stroke, or I could add an effect. So I'll quickly just show you the effects that I have up here. You can actually access them from the appearance palette, or you can access them from this top menu. So a good one to kind of play with that's sort of fun is the pucker and bloat effect. Now notice that right now I'm selected on 1 stroke, this stroke that's yellow, that's 10 points. If I wanted this effect to happen simultaneously to both strokes and the fill, I would actually want to make sure that everything in here is selected. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select everything so that what I do is going to simultaneously happen to everything. If I click at the top here, then that'll happen as well. This path at the top represents the whole path. So if at that point I wanted to apply an effect, I'd go down, go pucker and bloat, for example, and I could apply the effect and preview it. So that's just a fun effect in Illustrator. But I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, and I'll show you how this Appearance Attributes panel really lets you select individual attributes of paths to manipulate. So I'll click this stroke that I created that was yellow. Now notice I'm selected on it. I'm not going to do anything to it, but I am going to apply an effect just to that stroke. So I'll go back up to my effects here. I'll go to Distort and Transform, and why don't I just go for Pucker and Bloat again. I'm going to bloat it a little bit, 30 points, and then I'll click here. Now look, this stroke now has this effect. I'll click OK, and we can look and see where did that effect go. I have to expand that top stroke. There's always a little arrow here on all of your attributes. If I expand it, I notice that underneath it, it now says opacity default, which is the opacity of that stroke, and pucker and bloat, which is the effect I applied. Now, if I don't like that effect, if I want to go back to just plain yellow, or I want to modify it, I just click here. I can click at any time, and it takes me exactly to the dialog box where I was when I created the effect. I could go back to 0 at this point, or I could just delete the effect, or I could try pucker and modify it. So the beauty of the Appearance Attributes panel is that it lets you modify continuously. Nothing is ever permanent. You can always modify these attributes, change them, play around, and then go back to where you started, refine them. So that is kind of the beauty of Illustrator. Nothing is permanent with the paths. Okay, so kind of moving along, before we end the segment today, I want to look at our layers palette, because I know a lot of you guys are starting to work with layers, and I wanted to just make sure that you understood that you will default, when you open up Illustrator, you will default to a layer, and that will just say layer 1. But you can always add more layers by clicking on this Create New Layer tab, and a layer is just an organizational tool for you. And it's nice because you can turn layers off and they disappear, but they stay within your document. So if you ever want to re-access them, you just click on the little eye and they'll pop open again. Notice that you also have these little circles on the sides of layers. The circles represent what's selected. So for example, if I have multiple paths in a layer, I'm just going to go ahead and draw some new paths in here. And notice that as I draw, these paths are kind of popping open with the default here, which was purple and yellow, which was the last stroke I applied. So now I have a lot of paths on this layer. I still have my complicated path with the effect on the stroke, and then I have a bunch more little ones that I just created. Now, as I select paths, I want you to kind of pay attention to what's happening in the Layers palette. As you select a path, the little circle will become highlighted, and that lets you know exactly what path you are selected on. Now all these paths are on layer 1, but let's say for whatever reason I wanted to take one of these paths and put it on layer 2 so that I could organize it a little differently. That is really simple. All you have to do is take the layer, whatever layer you want to change the order of, and you click on it and you drag it up and let go. Once you drag it and let go, it pops up on the other path, or sorry, on the other layer. So you can easily kind of transport information from one layer to the next simply by dragging. Also notice that you have a little side menu here. You have new layer, new sub layer, duplicate layer, and then there's a way that you can isolate, create an isolation mode where it's easier to see things. So we're going to be talking about all this a little bit later in the semester.